The Viz Function Concept is a way to split out your visualization logic from your main program. This is a refactoring, and I like to refactor early and often, that will set us up nicely for more complex scenarios. We'll be refactoring our margin rectangle such that the main function invokes the Viz function, and the Viz function defines the reusable logic based on configuration options. The behavior here is exactly right, but this code, to me, is starting to conflate a bunch of things together. It's the main function, which is the entry point, and it also defines these margins as variables. It's also responsible for the SVG, the container, and it also builds this rect. In preparation for building more advanced and complex visualizations, I would like to split out the logic that renders this rectangle into a function that is configurable with these margins. I'll start by forking this viz. I'll call it Viz Function Concept. I'll start by defining a function called viz. This will be a naming convention that we use to define our configurable visualizations. And this will be a function. And in here is where we will manage this rectangle. So I'm just going to move that code into there. The problem now is we don't have access to SVG or the margins. So let's introduce those as arguments. The convention that I like to use is that the first argument is a D3 selection of an SVG element or a group element, and the second argument is an options object. And that options object contains properties for margin left and margin top and margin right and margin bottom. And also, we're going to need the width and the height on the options object to compute the inner width and inner height. Now we need to invoke this function and construct the options object. We can do that down here by saying viz, passing SVG as the first argument, and the second argument will be essentially these variables, and we can remove this code here because we compute the inner width and inner height inside of that function. Now, to define this as an object, we can say margin top colon 50, and so on and so forth, and also pass in the width and the height. I much prefer this setup because it's clear where everything is configured. It's outside of the generic logic, and it's inside the main function. Just to confirm that this still works, I can change the margins here and observe that the rectangle updates. This basically works, but there are a number of things we can do to clean up the code. Notice how width is set to be width. This duplication can be eliminated by just passing width and height like that. This is a special shorthand notation of JavaScript. Also, in the viz function, rather than saying options.this and options.that over and over and over again, we could use a feature called destructuring. And that looks something like this. Const open curly brace margin left equals options. That's equivalent to saying const margin left equals options dot margin left. I like using destructuring like this because it's just a lot cleaner. There's a lot less duplication. And we can do the same for the other variables and then delete all this other code down here. And we can refer to width directly without the options dot, same with height. Okay, there's the refactored version that uses destructuring, and it does the same thing. One last thing I would like to do is split out this function into another file. We can do this by creating a new file. I'll call it viz.js, and then I'll just copy that code out of index.js and paste it into viz.js. Now we can use what's called a named export, and we can say export const viz equals this function. This defines a named export on this module. And when I say module, I mean an ES module, ECMAScript module, also known as JavaScript modules. This is the standard way of splitting up logic across multiple files. To make this work again, we need to import the named export called viz from the local file, which is indicated by /viz. Now it works again. All right, that is the Viz Function Concept. Now all the sort of generic logic for the visualization is isolated in this module called viz.js, which we import in index.js, which is the main entry point. And main is responsible for what I like to think of as top-level things like measuring the dimensions, setting up the SVG, and then it invokes our viz function, passing the SVG, a D3 selection, and this options object. Inside of viz.js, we use destructuring. This is a JavaScript feature that extracts properties from objects, such as this options object. And you know, we can take this one step further by actually moving this destructuring right into the second argument here, like that. That makes the code even smaller by removing the need for that variable called options. Now I noticed there's just one last hard-coded thing, which is this fill color. Here's how we can make that into an option. I'll call it inner-rect fill, which we can destructure here from our options object, like that. And when this runs, it's undefined, so that uses the default fill, which is black. But then we can go here and define it to be that color that we set from earlier. One great thing about options objects, as opposed to sequential arguments, is that the order doesn't matter. You can rearrange them and organize them as you see fit. The ordering does not need to match between the outside and the inside, because after all, it's an object that has properties. So that's the Viz Function Concept. This will set us up nicely to develop more visualizations like scatter plots, bar charts, line charts, and more.